1, 2. Okay, we want to start to have enough time for a short clip and some questions. So if you guys can take a seat, you're welcome to continue to chew. It's fine. Bring your plates and sandwiches and coffees and hamburgers and whatever you have. Okay, so while everybody's kind of gathering around, I will just say a few words. We were supposed to have like a meetup of people that want to be activists. I would just say that if you're interested in activism and creating your own group, ARI will make a couple of steps to make your life easier by producing a lot of content that is relevant to you. If you're interested in creating a group, then just, where's Thomas is over there, who has a list. So put your name on a list and we'll be in touch with you. We'll do a webinar together and just talk about what we're planning to do. So if you're interested, it doesn't matter. It could be 5 people in a room getting together, talking about ideas on a bi-weekly basis or a monthly basis. So that's something that you can do. We will start with a 9-minute clip of Ayn Rand talking about her ideas and introducing objectivism in really fundamental manner. And then do we have Onkar and Greg? Here's Greg and Ben somewhere. He's right here. Okay, so after this is gonna play, we're gonna have Onkar, Greg, and Ben come sit here and answer any kind of questions you have about objectivism. I will give a preference to the newbies. So if you're an advanced person who read everything Rand, give them a priority. Okay. So let's roll the clip.
At a sales conference at Random House, preceding the publication of Atlas Shrugged, one of the book salesmen asked me whether I could present the essence of my philosophy while standing on one foot. I did, as follows. One, metaphysics, objective reality. 2, epistemology, reason. 3, ethics, self-interest. 4, politics, capitalism. If you want this translated into simple language, it would read: 1, nature to be commanded must be obeyed, or wishing won't make it so. 2, you can't eat your cake and have it too. 3, man is an end in himself. 4, give me liberty or give me death. If you held these concepts with total consistency as the base of your convictions, you would have a full philosophical system to guide the course of your life. But to hold them with total consistency, to understand, to define, to prove, and to apply them requires volumes of thought. Which is why philosophy cannot be discussed while standing on one foot, nor while standing on 2 feet on both sides of every fence. This last is the predominant philosophical position today, particularly in the field of politics. In the space of a column, I can give only the briefest summary of my position as a frame of reference for my future columns. My philosophy, Objectivism, holds that 1, reality exists as an objective absolute. Facts are facts, independent of man's feelings, wishes, hopes, or fears. 2, reason, the faculty which identifies and integrates the material provided by man's senses, is man's only means of perceiving reality, his only source of knowledge, his only guide to action, and his basic means of survival. 3. Man, every man, is an end in himself, not the means to the ends of others. He must exist for his own sake, neither sacrificing himself to others nor sacrificing others to himself. The pursuit of his own rational self-interest and of his own happiness is the highest moral purpose of his life. 4. The ideal political economic system is laissez-faire capitalism. It is a system where men deal with one another not as victims and executioners, nor as masters and slaves, but as traders, by free, voluntary exchange to mutual benefit. It is a system where no man may obtain any values from others by resorting to physical force, and no man may initiate the use of physical force against others. The government acts only as a policeman that protects man's rights. It uses physical force only in retaliation and only against those who initiate its use, such as criminals or foreign invaders. In a system of full capitalism, there should be, but historically has not yet been, a complete separation of state and economics, in the same way and for the same reasons as the separation of state and church. Capitalism was the system originated in the United States. Its success, its progress, its achievements are unprecedented in human history. America's political philosophy was based on man's right to his own life, to his own liberty, to the pursuit of his own happiness, which means on man's right to exist for his own sake. That was America's implicit moral code, but it had not been formulated explicitly. This was the flaw in her intellectual armor, which is now destroying her. America and capitalism are perishing for lack of a moral base. The destroyer is the morality of altruism. Altruism holds that man has no right to exist for his own sake, that service to others is the only moral justification of his existence, and that self-sacrifice is his highest moral duty. The political expression of altruism is collectivism or statism, which holds that man's life and work belong to the state, to society, to the group, the gang, the race, the nation, and that the state may dispose of him in any way it pleases for the sake of whatever it deems to be its own tribal collective good. From her start, America was torn by the clash of her political system with the altruist morality. Capitalism and altruism are incompatible. They cannot coexist in the same man or in the same society. Today, the conflict has reached its ultimate climax. The choice is clear-cut. Either a new morality of rational self-interest, with its consequences of freedom, justice, progress, and man's happiness on earth, or the primordial morality of altruism, with its consequences of slavery, brute force, stagnant terror, and sacrificial furnaces. You may observe the practical results of altruism and statism all around us in today's world, such as the slave labor camps of Soviet Russia, where 21 million political prisoners work on the construction of government projects and die of planned malnutrition, human life being cheaper than food, or the gas chambers and mass slaughter of Nazi Germany, or the terror and starvation of Red China, or the hysteria of Cuba, where the government offers men for sale, or the wall of East Berlin, where human beings leap from roofs or crawl through sewers in order to escape, while guards shoot at fleeing children. Observe these atrocities, then ask yourself whether any of it would be possible if men had not accepted the idea that man is a sacrificial animal to be immolated for the sake of the public good. Read the speeches of those countries' political leaders and ask yourself what arguments would be left to them if the word sacrifice were not regarded as a moral ideal, but as the anti-human evil which it is. And then, listen to the speeches of our present administration and ask yourself the same question.
Ben and Greg, and I don't know if Onkar is around, so I'm answering a lot of questions down there, so maybe he's doing the same. But, oh, here he is. Okay. So if you have questions about objectivism, even if you know nothing, and you want to ask simple questions, go ahead. Same format, you can go there and ask some questions. Again, priorities for newbies.
Hello. I have a problem accepting because there is in my mind, there is a argument that says that there is no objective reality and we cannot know anything about it. And from there, I want to address the issue of the arbitrary. I think in objectivism, it's yeah. I've talked to some objectivists.
The first thing is you said there's an argument that there's no objective reality. So what is the argument?
Oh no, it's just a statement that there is no basis on. I accept it as a reasonless statement. I just have this idea that I'm trying to get rid of.
You're trying to get rid of it?
Yes.
Oh, I see why it's a problem. We're supposed to
Exactly.
we're supposed to help you get rid of this idea.
Yeah.
Well, I'd suggest thinking about why you think it and what you mean by it, because those things are related. If you just hold something and you're not sure why you hold it, you're often also not sure quite what you hold. So I would think about what do you mean when you say there's no objective reality, and what things make you think that's true? And think about those two questions together, and maybe you'll discover that you're right, and it's not a problem, and you shouldn't try to get rid of it. But I think what you'll discover is that it doesn't make much sense, and you'll find that you are rid of it. But give it a shot.
Yeah. Thank you. I guess.
But I thought you had a second
Oh
part.
yeah, about the arbitrary.
Yeah.
Well, why don't maybe we'll let her go, and then you go again about the arbitrary. Okay.
So because I know why, like the thing there, if a tree falls in a jungle and no one saw it, did it really fall? And this is like my entrance to questioning the objective reality. Like I cannot accept the idea that without a perceiver, without someone perceiving the reality, how can there be any objective reality?
Without an objective reality, how could there be a perceiver? I mean, isn't a perceiver someone who perceives what's out there? What does perceiver mean then?
A perceiver is someone that creates reality in his own mind. Let's put it like that. So without him observing and making it come to life in his mind, there is nothing.
I mean, I think if you're really thinking about this issue, you need to think about, okay, I think most other people in this room, at least, or maybe everyone else, thinks there is an objective reality. And
Yeah.
what does that mean? And what it means, I think, is you need to make a distinction between the objects you're aware of and your awareness of them. And a young child does this. This is part of when they learn, they play peekaboo and think that you close your eyes. It's not the world that goes out of existence. It's your perception of the world, or at least your visual perception ends if I close my eyes. And this is how you get a distinction between there's a world and there's my perception of the world. And no sophisticated argument can knock that out. This is everyone's in developing as a human being, and that now you're able to talk and have language and talk to me, and I'm not in your head. And you can get that there's a difference between the world and my awareness of the world. And that's how you get the idea there's an objective reality. And part of what it means to call it objective, it can become the object of my consciousness. That is, I can become aware of it. But you get that distinction very early on. And any kind of sophisticated argument that seems like it doesn't, in the end, it doesn't, those arguments don't make any sense. They require you to be hearing the argument.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, and you have to take seriously that and not just think of this as all word games, but think seriously of what are the facts and what do I actually grasp, what do I grasp about myself, and then take that seriously versus people telling you, no, it's all just a dream. And so,
Thank you.
And I'll just add one thing, which is that to follow up on a question that Greg was asking you, okay, what is a perceiver? And you gave an answer something along the lines of, well, it's somebody who creates a reality out of his mind. But what's a mind? And I don't mean that in a flip way. Can you make sense of what a mind is unless it's in contrast to the reality of which it is aware, which it is contemplating? And I mean, it sounds like your question's coming from a background of having studied probably arguments from various idealist 19th century philosophers. Tree falls in the wood example always comes up in that connection. And I mean, it's worth thinking about how there's a whole other tradition of philosophers who have trouble even knowing what you're talking about when you say there are minds, and all they think there is physical stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, they have the flip side problem, which is, well, how do you make sense of what the physical is if it's not in contrast to the mind that's aware of it? But I mean, these are concepts that are understood in connection, in contrast with each other.
Okay, thank you. I'll check.
Okay, hello. So I'm pretty new to Ayn Rand, and I'm from Germany. And I was just wondering, and maybe you can explain to me how come that Ayn Rand is so controversial in public?
I'll give you one element of it. So she said she's challenging 2,000 years plus of Western ideas. And I think she really is. And to take one aspect of it, she's challenging moral views that have existed and been dominant since Christianity, and in some ways pre-Christianity in the West. And particularly the idea that what morality is about is serving some cause, some goal higher than yourself, higher than your life, higher than your happiness. And she says that view is completely wrong. It's not just wrong, it's destructive and evil. The people who originate and push this view, not everyone who accepts it, but the people who originate and push this view, far from being moral, are pushing something that they know deep down is wrong. And she champions the whole other viewpoint, and she writes a book called The Virtue of Selfishness that is a challenge to this. And that she's going to have some people who disagree and disagree vehemently with what she's doing. I mean, I think it is to be expected that she'll meet a lot of opposition. Anyone who's challenging moral views, even just on a particular issue, say about slavery in the 19th century, meets all kinds of opposition from the culture, and the abolitionists met that. And here's someone who's not just challenging one particular idea, but the whole theory from which this is coming, she's going to meet tremendous amount of opposition.
Okay, I have a second question right now, because are you thinking this would change in the next 100 years?
The next 100?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've got a decent chance over the next 100 years. Over the next 5 or 10, I don't think so. But I mean, we could have progress and change and accomplish things and convince more people. But I think 100 years is the shortest time frame on which you could imagine her no longer being controversial. It might take more than that, but that's, I expect, even if we make really good headway in the culture, she's still going to be a subject of controversy for many decades and probably a bit longer than that.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. So that's the question I wanted to ask Mr. Salmieri before the panel. Though it's not exactly in the context of the video, it still is a very fundamental one. So what is, according to Objectivism, the main factor which differentiates love from friendship?
Which differentiates love from friendship?
Yep.
So I think there are two things that I want to separate, because I think you can talk about love in a context that's separate from romantic love between people who are sexually attracted to one another. And then there is specifically romantic love, which is sexual. So I would say love in general is the most intense, extreme form of valuing. It's where you value something in a way where you think, this is essential to my life. This is among my top values. I, maybe not quite literally, but can't live without this, in the sense that if this was taken from me, if I lost it, my life would be permanently impaired and lacking something. Maybe I could go on, but I couldn't go on the same way. This is really a piece of me, central to me. And you can, in that way, love people who, I think you can't love very many people in that way. But you can love people apart from a romantic partner. You could love a very close friend. You could also love things other than people. You could love a work of art or a job or something, something that you are really invested in that way. But I think of love as the kind of extreme of valuing. Valuing is making something a goal that you pursue, and something you love is so central to you in all its particularity, and it's what your life's about, part of what your life's about. And friends are people who you value, but not all of them, indeed not most of them, are people who you value that extremely. You're lucky if you have one or two such people in a life. And then romantic love is, I think, even a more special and separate thing than that. Romantic love is that kind of intense valuing of somebody, coupled with the desire to express that love sexually. And there are questions about sexual attraction and sexual orientation and how that works, but which are kind of they're psychological questions that I'm in no way expert on. But when you have those two things together, it's really fantastic. You have the ability to experience in a physical form that involves very intense bodily sensations the kind of relationship you have with somebody who you value in this very intense way. And then and that relationship and then the physical act, the act of love, is a means of experiencing what you love about life and what you love about the other person. Then the one other aspect I'd add to all of this is that what you're responding to in a person when you value them in any significant way, even short of love, but certainly when you value them as you love them, either as a friend or as a romantic lover, is, well, what is it exactly? It's good things about them or things about them that you think are good, but it's not like you value them for some interchangeable feature, or you value some feature of them as apart from them themselves. If you really are friends with a person, you are responding to them or valuing them in all of their particularity as the particular unique human being they are. You're responding to certain values in them, but you're responding to those values in the particular concrete way that they're developed and instantiated and formed into the unique individual that is. And if you love someone, all the more so. And Rand had this term sense of life for someone's kind of view of the world and values and character, insofar as it's integrated subconsciously into a way of experiencing the world that's expressed, it's kind of like an undertone for all their emotions, and expressed in, she called it, the style of an individual soul. And I think sense of life is a very big part of friendship, and certainly the central component of love. That is, what you love about the other person is that, and what in you responds to them is your own sense of life.
Okay, thank you.
Should we maybe add something there also about the relationship of the point that you just made to this morality of self-interest that was presented in the introduction? Because I've been getting a lot of questions from people about this, about how do I relate these ideas, the idea of being a rational individualist, to the fact that I love my family and the fact that I love my friends, and I have very intense, I was just having a conversation with someone, I have very intense emotions about them. And it's important for her view that this philosophy of love that Greg just described is one that she sees as expressing one's own chosen values, and therefore as constituting one's own self-interest, rationally understood, where part of what's happening is that the question is, what is yourself that has an interest? And yourself is constituted by these chosen values. And it's because you've been in a process of building yourself that you feel these intense emotions about it.
Yeah, I think on all of this and in all of these questions and thinking about it, we should distinguish two different things we might be doing with our minds. One of them is, in effect, scholarship. So we're like, what does Rand think as opposed to what does someone else think, Kant think, or Plato think, or whomever. And so, yeah, I think both. And the other thing is what's true and what should we think. And I think on both points, I agree with you, Ben. So that it is an important part of Rand's view that that love is selfish, and that yourself is constituted by your mind and your core values, and the things that you love are among your core values. So as someone who's reading another author and trying to think about what she means, I think yes, this is an important point about her take on love. But also, and maybe more importantly for us, I think this is true. I think if you think about what you want out of life, what makes your life worth living, what you value, other people are among the things you value most and that are most important to your life. There are reasons why you value the people you do, and they play an important role in your life. And we were talking about what some of those reasons are.
Okay, this isn't quite as interesting as love and sex, so sorry if this is a bummer, but concerning the panel we had before, we've been talking rather concretely about, the whole issue of political Islam, and we've been making a lot of distinctions, and I would encourage you to talk a bit more about about the connection between unreason, faith, and violence.
Yeah, I mean, from the perspective of objectivism and from Ayn Rand's perspective, there's a deep connection between and it relates actually to my first talk of the rise of tribalism and into warring gangs. But the gangs or groups was one of the aspects. The warring is another aspect of it, so that it's clashes, and that in the end, the clashes are going to be settled by the fist and by the gun. So when she's talking about global balkanization, it's splitting up into tribes and what that means, part of what that means and what we're descending into is increasing conflict at the level of physical force. And if you remember, one of the major elements that she thinks that leads to tribalism is irrationalism. So any viewpoint that is preaching that the individual mind is not able to know reality and to chart a human being's course in reality. So any form of what she's calling irrationalism, or sometimes she'll put it as unreason. So any form that's saying reason, even if you have it, is not potent. So it's not valid, it's not able to know reality. Your real connection, if you have a connection to reality, is through some other means. And the means are often dressed up as it's instinct, intuition, revelations from beyond, and so faith. What it really amounts to in the end is you're going by your emotions, and emotions treated as primaries. And the more you do that, and the more a person is loses confidence in his power of reason and turns his life over to emotions, the more he can't deal with the world or other people. And you can't engage in persuasion and discussion of other people. Persuasion, discussion, convincing each other of points all presupposes we have individual minds and we're able to think about the evidence and so on. And the way that religion spreads by indoctrination, really in the end, is it's an aspect of that religion is essentially about a faith that you have to swallow, not reason about. And it's not, most people who believe in God, it's not that they've been given 5 arguments, Aquinas' 5 arguments for the existence of God, and they figure, oh yeah, this third one really works, and so I'm going to believe in God. They've been indoctrinated and inculcated with this, sometimes in more innocent ways, but all these unreasoned viewpoints, in the end, they're not about persuasion. For themselves and all the adherents to communism or to Catholicism, in the end, they haven't accepted this for reasons. And they don't view other people as you need to accept this for reasons. So they will, in the end, and particularly when they gain ascendancy, and this is why all religions, when they gain ascendancy, will use force to spread their doctrines. So there's a deep connection, I think, between the
They can't defend it by reason, so in the end, force is the only thing that's left to them, I think.
I've been getting a lot of questions connected to this about why is Ayn Rand so down on religion, and can't a person be an individualist and still believe in God? Why does she think that one can't? And I think, Onkar, you've just touched on a number of the reasons. I mean, one issue is that when you're talking about something like religious faith, what you really are talking about is surrendering yourself to the kind of emotions that lead to tribalism and lead to tribalist conflict. But there's another point as well, and it relates to the first question about objective reality, and it's what is a God supposed to be that you believe in? A God is supposed to be a kind of superconscious being that's in control of the universe, that creates the universe and manipulates it to his purposes. And if you think about what that really implies in the end, it implies a repudiation of the idea of an objective reality. And once you do that, you undercut the basis of having something to know. We're concerned with using our minds to know reality, but the reality that we're trying to know is ineffable, is the product of some mysterious manipulations. There's nothing to know. There's no standard against which to compare our judgments, and there's no common frame of reference for human beings to refer to try to come to some kind of understanding and to communicate with each other by means of reason.
Thank you.
Hi. Hard question. Is a pure psychopath that kills in order to fulfill his self-interest and in order to flourish morally unjustified? And if it's not, why?
Why would it be self-interested for this psychopath to kill people?
Why not?
Well, what does he have to gain from it?
I don't know, maybe the pleasure to kill people?
Well, he's not going to have it for very long. And, I mean, psychopaths, it's a psychological condition. We don't know as much about it as we'd like. My understanding of it is that they're people who don't experience some of the emotions dealing with, they have difficulty empathizing with others, they have difficulty seeing other people's points of view, and this is a cognitive impairment. And so, I mean, it's sort of like asking if a dyslexic person wants to go into publishing and write things that nobody can read because the letters are all out, or isn't that selfish of him? No, what's he going to accomplish by doing that? He's got an impairment in his ability that makes him not able to function a certain way. You could see why that might lead him to mistakenly do something crazy, but he's not benefiting by doing the crazy thing, and he's not, I mean, if you think about what it is to have a self-interest and to pursue what's good for you, you have to have a set of values that cohere together into a self-sustaining life that keeps you going. You have to be able to use your mind to figure out how to produce things and make things and evaluate things, and the things that you produce have to be kinds of things that could keep human beings alive so that you're not dying or mooching off of other people, because if you're dying, and if you're mooching off of other people, then your life isn't in your own hands. You're going to have poor relationships with those other people that are going to be unstable, and so forth. A psychopath is someone who is at a tremendous disadvantage in performing that process and in living well. And there was a really interesting article in The Atlantic that I'd recommend you find. I can't remember the name of it. Ben, I know you read The Atlantic, you might remember
I know
it.
the one you're talking about.
There's a family, so there's a school, I don't know, I think it's like an institution that's trying to help children who are psychopaths or proto-psychopaths develop so that they can be normal people who can have a functioning life. And you read about these, there are case studies of these people who are going through this institution, and these horrible, scary children who were like hurting and tormenting their siblings and people around them. And what kind of life is in store for these kids? They're not going to be able to flourish and succeed and have anything resembling a decent human life. They're not going to be happy. It's not a life you can be happy leading, one of killing people and maiming them and being a serial killer. And they know this, some of these kids, and yet they're not able to keep themselves living a decent life. And these doctors at the hospital are trying to help them and train them. And it's a sad, horrible, tragic thing. I mean, I wouldn't wish it on anybody being a psychopath.
But how could you be sure that they will not be happy?
Well, do you know any happy psychopaths? Have you ever heard of one?
No, do you know some psychopaths that are happy or unhappy?
I don't see how they could be. I mean, happiness is the state of emotion that is the state of experiencing the fact that you're achieving values that cohere into a life that can keep you going. If you're not doing that, how could you be happy? I mean, you could smile a bit in this kind of deranged, demented way, but that scares everyone around you. But that's not happiness. Ben, did you have?
Just the article that you were talking about is called When Your Child is a Psychopath. It was by Barbara Haggerty, August 31st, 2018.
I will check.
It was a really sad and interesting article.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you, everyone. So we're going to keep Onkar and Greg on the panel, and we're going to invite Douglas Murray to join them. All right, I'll find Douglas. So we're now going to discuss multiculturalism, nationalism, and ethnicity. I don't know why I can't pronounce that. Ethnicity. Let me just rush out and find Douglas, and if you guys could start your presentation.
Let's, because it's better if... Maybe we should just take another question if anyone has one while we wait for Douglas, because it's... because it's a little odd to start a panel where we aren't all... We're meant to be talking to one another as much as... go ahead.
Thank you. So my question is about the previous thing bit. So there are some individuals who do these terrorist attacks or things which are not acceptable to the community. Basing upon the acts of these few individuals, there are some big decisions taken by countries or the world. How do you think in objectivism perspective, who is doing the right or who is doing the wrong here in judging the things? And my second question is, what is the perception of ignorance by objectivism? Like, for example, Sir Ghate, he told that...
I think let's stop with the first question. Onkar, did you have anything you wanted to say in response to it? Or?
I mean, in regard to if you're asking it in the context of thinking about 9/11 and something like that, then I think if it were that these were isolated actors, if you really thought about them in the way that it was like a criminal gang of just these 12 conspirators who wanted to fly planes into the World Trade Center, then you would, if that's were the facts, then yes, you would have a very different response to it, and it would be, I mean, many of these people have died in the attacks, to figure out if it was this gang a little bit bigger and do we have to round up and so. But if the context is that I don't think it's in the end right to think of this as terrorism when it's thought of as individual terrorists who happen to be a lot of them in all these different countries. You have to see it as connected to a whole ideology and a whole political movement that has gained political ascendancy in the Middle East, and that it is one of the kinds of language that was used around the time of 9/11, which I think is, I wouldn't use it exactly like this, but it gets to the better idea. It was called state-sponsored terrorism. Now, I don't think it's right to think of it just as terror. It's state-sponsored attacks. These are really like proxy armies. And when you look at how Iran funds all these different groups, it's exactly this. It's like outsourcing an army. And in that context, then it has to be a military response. That's not to say that what we did either in Afghanistan or Iraq is any good. I think, and as the Institute as an organization had a lot of critical things to say, and the basic idea of how all this was thought about from a foreign policy and military perspective, I think was basically or essentially wrong. But that it warranted a military response, not this is some criminal gang that we have to round up. And that's my view.
Okay, thank you. We should move on to the panel now.
Okay.
So do you want to start off doing, I know you had some prepared.
Well, no, I'll leave it to someone else if they want to start off. But so this is our last panel of the day. As Annie said, we're talking about multiculturalism, nationalism, and ethnicity. I mean, I can say a few things at the start. I think these are some of the, particularly the multiculturalism and ethnicity, are two ideas that started to gain currency in probably the 70s, maybe a little bit into the 60s. And I think both of these ideas are anti-individualism ideas, and they're anti-individualism and anti-valuing ideas, and that they were pushing this is part of the explanation. If it's right that we're now in an age of tribalism, part of the explanation is that these ideas were formulated and then systematically pushed in educational circles. And they were pushed under a guise that there's something right about them. And I think one has to think very carefully about separating out what may have been legitimate in the way that it was presented and what was illegitimate. And this is, in Objectivism, we talk about this as a lot of ideas and concepts are package deals. They package together things that don't belong together in one package because they differ in, so like some are true, some are false, some are good, some are bad. And you're packaging these all together and you have to treat these all as the same, and you don't. So in regard to multiculturalism, part of the way that this idea that we, if you know America in particular, there's a plausibility to this idea that we're ignorant of other cultures. And a real education you should not be so parochial, and you should know more about other cultures, other ideas, other ways of living and of addressing questions, other religions and so on. And I do think a real education does expose people to this. And it is important to take other viewpoints, other ideas, other cultures seriously, and to think about them, think about their development, but to think about what is good and bad, right and wrong in these various different cultures. And what multiculturalism was about is that learn about other cultures, they're all equal. And the all equal aspect of it is now, so don't, and there was a real militancy to it, I think it was, don't you dare judge that some of the ideas in another culture you think are false. And don't you dare say that some of these ideas are wrong and that they're immoral. No, everything is equal. And indeed, so part of that, when you treat everything as equal, you're elevating the false and denigrating the true, and you're elevating the evil and you're denigrating the good. To treat good and evil as they're both equal is to destroy the good and to aid the evil. So you had this kind of view that it's, shouldn't we learn about other cultures? And if you ever said, yeah, but that's a primitive culture, that's a backward tradition, and so, what, you don't want to learn about other cultures? No, it's valuable to learn about them, but can I evaluate them? And packaging these two together, that either you're an ignoramus that only knows your little neck of the woods, or like that's the alternative, or you have to view all cultures as equal. Those are like your two choices. Those are not the two choices. You should learn about other cultures, but you should subject your own culture and the cultures of others to real evaluation. And so this was a way of and you see this in the discussion of Islam and the extent to which any criticism of any of its practices, including genital mutilation, is, who are you to judge another culture? and that, if you really inculcate that into people's viewpoints, it really destroys their ability to think and their ability to value. And maybe I'll just say, so there's similar things to be said about the idea of ethnicity, but that is one of the ideas that I think if it's done under the guise of a positive, but was really a negative idea.
Let me then pick up on ethnicity. So, I mean, what the hell is an ethnicity? I mean, it's sort of like, it's a package deal of culture and race. So it's culture viewed as something that you're attached to because of your ancestry and really ultimately because of your skin color. So, I mean, why is it thought of as racist to criticize Islam, for example, or some other religion, or some other, or FGM in some cultures or something? Well, because the people who come from cultures, that is, their ancestors practiced this and they were raised in it, are seen to be kind of like biologically attached to these cultural ideas, these just ideas that people who were their ancestors and who looked like them and were their parents had. Maybe they have them, maybe they don't have these ideas, but it's seen as like a part of them or connected to them in some way like their biology is. So that if you criticize it, you're criticizing them in some racist way, right? And so because at some basic level we think people are equal, not equal in their accomplishments or goodness or badness or any of the other, but they have equal rights, an equal right to life, you shouldn't therefore say people of this color are bad because they're of this color, or from this country are bad because they're from this country, or good for that matter because they're from this country. You can't therefore criticize their culture, which are just the ideas that people hold in different necks of the woods. But now we take those ideas and somehow wedded to them. And take another example of this. So you criticize, and I'm very critical of, the monuments to the Confederacy that are up in the southern United States, and the flying of the Confederate flag. And people say, but it's not a symbol of hate or an endorsement of slavery, it's just my culture. Well, all right, but it's a culture of having slaves and celebrating people who fought to the death to preserve the system of slavery, thereby being traitors to a free country and to the very aspects of that country that were working to correct the tremendous evil in its founding, namely the toleration of slavery. That's your culture. What does it mean that it's your culture? It's just an idea you hold that you feel entitled not to criticize and to protect from criticism by others because you think you have some biological imperative or some, because of where you were raised. It's some idea that's meant to be immune from critical thinking by you and immune from criticisms by others, which you then interpret as attacks on your person because you were born someplace where people said this, as though it were part of your race, as though it were part of your biology to believe this thing. But it's not. Ideas are ideas. You don't inherit ideas, really. You inherit them in the sense that you learn them from people. But then you have to think, are they true? Are they good? This is how things are done in these neck of the woods. I started doing it because it's what the people were around me were doing. And so I'm in the habit of doing it. But what makes you a human being is that you're able to reflect on that and say, well, do I want to keep doing this? Is it good? And once you do that reflection, is this true? Is this good? Is this right? Then you either keep doing it or not. And if you keep doing it, it's because you think it is good. Maybe not the only good thing. Maybe there are several good cuisines, and the fact that I was brought up in this one makes me, I've learned enough about it that I have a head start, and so I'll be a chef in this cuisine rather than that. Or I'll do poetry in English rather than French or Urdu or something, because that's what I learned first. But I have to think that it's good and worth writing in this language. And so what I think the idea of ethnicity is, and I think it's a really destructive idea, is the idea of the ideas that constitute a culture being somehow part of and affixed to somebody independent of their thinking or choice, such that they are intellectually justified in holding on to them, whether or not they're true or false, reasonable or unreasonable, and you are unjustified in criticizing them, whether or not they're true or false, reasonable or unreasonable. And I think that is really wrong.
Let me pick up on one aspect of that. There's a very interesting poem by, I don't know how many of you have read W.H. Auden. Generally people like the stuff from the 30s but think he became too obscure by the 40s. But there's a poem of his from the latter part of his career called Streams. It has an extraordinary close, which has been much in my mind. It finishes with this strange dream vision. He has a sort of, he says, Auden writes, he writes this mystical figure. He says, with a wave of his wand, he commanded a dance. So round in a ring we flew, my dear on my right when I awoke. But fortunate seemed that day because of my dream, and enlightened, and dearer water than ever your voice, as if glad, though goodness knows why, to run with the human race. Wishing I thought the least of men their figures of splendor, their holy places. I find this incredibly moving, this poem. And partly it's because this last line, their figures of, wishing I thought the least of men their figures of splendor, their holy places. One of the things I've often thought in my quite regular trampling over people's holy places is the extent to which, first of all, you cannot always predict where they are, but that secondly, people will always have them, to some extent. And we're in Britain at the moment having this very funny one about Churchill. Every now and then somebody comes up and attacks Churchill. Churchill turns out to be one of Britain's holy places. How can you condemn Churchill? Okay, maybe he got this wrong, maybe he got that wrong. Yes, but he did the Nazis. He stopped this. He stopped the worst regime in history. Does that count for nothing? But you discover this is a holy place, and when people trip over it, lots of Indian historians have been, quite understandably in recent years in particular, doing pushback on this. But you realize we create these holy places. This is what religions are. This is, among other things, this is what, to some extent, ethnicities are. This is what nationalisms are to some extent. You create a story. I think one of the things I wanted to say about this was that one has to be so aware of what you're constructing as your holy places as you're going through it, because it's what we're doing at the moment in our society. We are constructing new holy places, the things you're not allowed to say, the things you're meant to believe, the things you have to follow. Some of us were speaking about this in the break. Get with the new ideas now, or you're going to be left behind. And the unforgivingness in this, one of the things that obsesses me, is the unforgiving attitude to the past, which is just astounding. Like, yeah, well, maybe you did, stop the Nazis going ever further in the continent, but, you were guilty of putting down this protest in 1911 where one miner was killed. So, why are we to defend you? And I'm just staggered by this at the moment. We are finding it so hard to have a reasonable attitude towards our recent or even distant past. And we're so damn confused about it. And we're trying to make up this stuff as we go along. And like, what are the rules exactly? And who makes them? And, I just wanted to say one other thing about that, which is, I mentioned this to somebody in the break as well. There was, in all of the things we're going through at the moment, all the things we're going to go through, that you're going to go through, that we're all going to go through in our lives, one of the things that's most on my mind is something that somebody I really loathe called John Pilger said a few years ago. He's a British journalist at the far left, never saw a communist regime he didn't love. And in 2003, after the liberation in Iraq, he was interviewed as a big enemy of America. He was interviewed by a left-wing publication, and who said, "Mr. Pilger, do we have to support the insurgency in Iraq?" Which had just got going and was blowing up people at their mosques, killing people in the street, murdering shopkeepers. And this interviewer in a comfortable Western country says to John Pilger in a comfortable Western country, "Do we have to support the insurgents in Iraq?" And John Pilger's response is, "Yes, we can't afford to be choosy." We can't afford to be choosy. If you are so dedicated to hating America as I, John Pilger, am, yeah, sure, whatever group's gonna poke them in the eye. And I just think through all of these questions that are gonna be going on in our lifetimes on ethnicity, on nationalism, on multiculturalism, and so much more, if there's one thing, it's to not take John Pilger's line and realize you can always afford to be choosy. Absolutely always.
Okay, so let's now open up the panel to questions and discussion. Do we want to do it again, that we take 3 questions?
I find that confusing.
Yeah, I do too, so I don't know.
Let's do one at a time, but try to make them briefer. Yeah, if they're very... Yeah, let's just be choosy about what we say about them. Mohammed?
Yeah. So, I mean, much was said about the value of Western civilization. Can I just have the panel please discuss what they think the role of Judeo-Christian values are in relation to what is valuable about the West?
You want to go down in one direction? I was advocating for taking one at a time, so. All right, 2 at a time. Compromise, yeah. Go ahead.
I have a similar question, but I would like to start with a poem, if I may. Okay.
Is it a short poem?
One verse. You all know it.
All right.
The stranger within my gate, he may be true or kind, but he does not talk my talk. I cannot feel his mind. I see the face, the eyes, the mouth, but not the soul behind. It's by Kipling. So my question is, do you believe that Western civilization is an evolutionary step in humanity, or is it not? Do everybody get there, or is it just something that is European?
So both of the questions obviously about Western civilization. I don't think of it as an evolutionary step in the sense of, if we're thinking about evolution in the biological context and you're looking at the development of organisms. I mean, it has a relationship to what came before and so, but it's not, I don't think history is like this movement, I don't think this is what evolution is exactly either, but history of movement to better and better things. There have been points in history, in recorded history, where things go in the reverse. I think it's a positive development. And so of what the value of Western civilization is, its relationship to the Judeo-Christian religion, I think of it as it's what's unique about the West is what Greece achieves in ancient Greece. So what is unprecedented in any other culture and its history, I think, is the discoveries that are made in ancient Greece. It's what gives us science and philosophy in a purely secular way that is not interconnected and is not tied to religion, and you get science, and you get mathematics, and you get this, and an explosion in the arts that there's no parallel, I think, in other cultures. And the body of knowledge that's discovered in ancient Greece in these areas is really astounding when you look at over the decades and centuries that it existed. So it's the new discovery of knowledge that I think is what, and it's a discovery of reason, and it's a discovery of the individual then. I think the birth of the individual as an individual who's able to think for himself is, in ancient Greece, you get this kind of viewpoint. And I think of the Romans as taking, and they thought of themselves as taking a lot over from the Greeks and building up a whole civilization and empire around that. So I think of the roots of the Western, what we think of as Western civilization, as essentially those discoveries. That then there's a grafting on of a religious viewpoint to them, but I think of it as it's essentially non-religious, and part of what happens in ancient Greece is that they're learning to divorce things that were always intertwined with religion, learning to divorce them from religion. And it's what part of the birth of reason and part of the birth of philosophy as a whole subject, distinct from and better than religion, is what you get there. So I think of it as essentially it's non-religious, and then you get a religious viewpoint that comes in with Christianity, and that takes over and morphs in many ways the ideas from the Greek-Roman world. So Christianity is heavily influenced by Plato, and I think it takes the worst of the Greek aspects and ideas, and the best is Aristotle and the worst is Plato, and what the and it's in the battle of philosophy, and it's often thought of, and I think rightly, that Western civilization is a battle of these two thinkers. And I think the periods in when Aristotle's ideas are on the ascendancy are the best periods in Western civilization, and the periods where Plato's ideas are in the ascendancy are the worst periods of it. But there's still this connection to the Greek viewpoint and so on. And I think even Christianity has that, because it's when you read the theologians, it's heavily influenced by Greek philosophy. So that's how I think of it's essentially non-religious. It gets grafted on, religion gets grafted on. And then there's a lengthy period where they're trying to separate these again. And I think from the Renaissance onwards, there's an attempt to separate it out that's not fully successful. And in philosophy, there's a real attempt to, can we have a philosophy that is coherent, that makes sense, that has a place for values and for sacred values and for the kinds of things that religion talks about, of reverence and of worship and of treating things as sacred. Can you have a philosophy that does that? And the period from the Renaissance into the Enlightenment is a project where they're trying to get a philosophy that does that. And I think it goes wrong in various kinds of ways. And the Enlightenment period was ripe to a counterattack of what happened with the counter-Enlightenment. But I think it's a project of trying to separate out, again, philosophy and reason from its being intertwined with religion. And it never fully succeeded in doing that. So I think of it as it's essentially non-religious, I think, of Western civilization.
I was very struck recently by a, is this on? I was very struck recently by a, no, it's not on. Is that on? Yeah. I was very struck recently by an interview with French writer Alain Finkielkraut, where he said something enormously perceptive, I think, about certainly the state of French thought and culture at the moment. And I think you could apply it to a lot of Western Europe, if not all of Europe. He said there was a time in the 18th and 19th century where we thought that our values in France were values that could be taken around the world and indeed were for the whole world. And then in the 20th century, we started to retract that vision. And now in the 21st century, Finkielkraut said, now in the 21st century, we're wondering, can we at least keep it for ourselves? Very deep and perceptive observation, and one I think that speaks to something at the very root of the current concerns. Can we at least keep it for ourselves? I think we're going through all sorts of discoveries at the moment. One I would mention, the gentleman asked about, is everyone going to get there? It's not entirely clear that we stay here. I mean, I think that one of my lessons of recent years has been that the Enlightenment didn't go as deep or as wide as I thought it had at all. And as you discover that, as you discover how comparatively few people wish to hold on to that, live by that, or even know about it, it would be nice if everyone got there, but it would also be nice if we stayed there. And it's the latter one that preoccupies me more now.
And we haven't always stayed there. So this goes back to Onkar's point that it's not a upward, steady progression. And I think this is really relevant to thinking about the role of Christianity in Western civilization, because one way of thinking about it is Christianity is the first thing that destroyed Western civilization. So if you think about Greek civilization, the Greek Enlightenment, Greco-Roman civilization, the rise of learning, and it fell apart. And there were a number of causes of it falling apart. Many of them were internal. A great civilization can't be destroyed wholly from ideas that come in from without. But if you look at the proximate cause of the fall of Greek culture and Greco-Roman culture, there's a wonderful movie illustrating it, the movie Agora, that tells the story of Hypatia of Alexandria, who was a Neoplatonist mathematician, a woman mathematician, philosopher in the city of Alexandria in Egypt, which was a Greek city founded by Alexander, of course. And it tells the story of the fall of Alexandria. Of course, this is where the library of Alexandria burned and so forth. And what you see in the movie, and I think it's a movie, but I think it's historically accurate to this extent of the portrayal, is the Christians acting like ISIS, smashing the icons. I mean, we have the idea of iconoclast, right? Smashing and destroying the statues, the remnants of pagan culture, acting just like ISIS acted, right? No regard for the culture, no regard for the history, no regard for the ideas. And also, interestingly, I think you see portrayed in that movie, which is a really fascinating movie, one of the things that is often portrayed as, and I think with some justice, one of the good ideas in Christianity and the role that it played in making that possible, which is that we're shown, and again, this is a movie review, but we're shown part of what made the best of the Greek culture still have something that some of the better people were attracted to this Christian mob for, which was their attitude towards slaves. So they're lacking the idea that every individual is such that they can learn, can be an individual, should have the same rights as others. And so there's a really interesting character who's a student of Hypatia's, but also a slave, and she, despite being portrayed very sympathetically, doesn't see him as an equal in the respects that she should. And he had the movie is in a way his story. What side will he go with in this fall? But so I think you see there two elements of Christianity. It was something that led to the destruction, the tearing down of the accomplishments of the Greeks and the Romans. It was enabled to do so in part, I think, by some of their failings, and the slavery was one of them. And I think the rest of the history of Western civilization after that is a gradual crawling its way back from having been destroyed. So, I mean, there are, of course, some accomplishments in the Middle Ages, even prior to the Renaissance, even prior to the discovery of the Greeks in architecture and so forth. So it's not like nothing is accomplished during those centuries. But if you compare it to what life was like in Rome, in Greece, there's no comparison. And the Renaissance is a rediscovery of Greek and Roman culture. Even the later Middle Ages is a rediscovery of Greek learning through Albertus Magnus and Thomas Aquinas and all of these people who are integrating into the Western mind or the European mind the thought of Aristotle and others. And the Enlightenment is, I think, now when the Western mind is is freeing itself in a certain way from the Greek influence. It's saying we're not going to slavishly copy the ancients anymore, but we're going to really take what was the essence of what we got from the ancients, which that human beings are capable of thinking, capable of reasoning, and we don't have to come to all the same conclusions as them. We want to take the essence of that method and try to improve it. And this was the real, I think, flowering of the scientific revolution, which is a non-religious movement that was coming in conflict with religion all the time, even though some of the people were religious who were members of it. It was essentially a non-religious movement. The Enlightenment is essentially a secularist and in many cases non-religious, even atheistic in some of its proponents movement. The American Revolution is a secularist revolution. And again, you have all of this in the Enlightenment period moving away from religion. And then the need when they moved away from religion is to articulate in a understandable, philosophically defensible, and meaningful to people way what then we are living by, what it's like to live by reason, what reason's role is in making possible values, what is the relationship between is and ought, between reason and values, how do we derive values from fact, how do we make our lives meaningful, etc. And these questions were not answered adequately. There were also questions about how to understand the basis of knowledge that weren't answered adequately, and that gave a room for questions about faith to come back in. Also importantly, the question of understanding free will. Do we have it or don't we? And what is it? Was a question that was very much on people's minds in this period, and I don't think was answered well. And so the failures on these questions and others, I think, left an opening, left people feeling confused, dissatisfied, and religion, there began to be great awakenings, right? So I think religion's, in a way, an alien, or Christianity anyway, is in a way an alien force in the West that's destroyed us once, or played a role in destroying us once, and is, may do it again. Whether it's the Christian religion, or Islam, or some other religion, or communism, which is a religion of its own form.
Thank you. A question about the culture from home. Isn't it the sum of ideas accumulated through history by your ancestors? Do we really believe that it is possible to rethink every single idea? Otherwise, don't we have to accept the culture from home and rethink bits of it when we get to them? Moreover, as a simple example, Russian Jews in Israel tend to burn much more at the sun than Jews that come from the Middle East. Isn't it then a good practice for me to put sunscreen when I get out of house? And this practice I would probably not have learned in a different household.
My question is not completely similar, but yeah. So when we talk about culture, we know that people practice culture or the daily life from many years. But recently we learned about rationalism or thinking rational. So how does objectivism help the rational thinking to prevail over without disregarding this good feeling of practicing something which you've been practicing? And just one more auxiliary question to that is, if we keep thinking rationally and practicing only those cultural aspects which we think are rational, what would be the future of cultural diversity?
All right, let me start on those, because I think they're connected to comments I made about evaluating cultural practices and not doing things because they're just what's done around these parts or was done by your ancestors. Yeah, you can rethink everything, not all at once. I mean, this is one of the good things about the Enlightenment. That's what they were trying to do, sometimes a little bit ham-fistedly. So Descartes thought he could sit in a room with a stove and over the course of a weekend rethink everything. You can't do it like that and that quickly. You have to do it sort of bit by bit, but here's how you do it bit by bit. When you see when you notice a certain thing that you're acting on, a way you're acting that other people act differently then, you don't think, well, this is my way because that's how we've always done it. You think, gee, some people do it differently. I wonder if that's better or worse. What reasons do I have for doing it my way? And you think, I could do it the other way. Why do I want to stick with my way? And sometimes you'll find the other way's better and you'll switch. Sometimes you'll find your way's better and you'll keep it. Sometimes you'll find they're both equally good, and since I'm used to mine, I'll do mine. Right? So likewise with beliefs, when you find yourself acting on a belief, using a belief in a process of reasoning, you notice not everybody shares this belief. So interacting with other cultures can help because you notice the differences, but interacting just with other individuals helps. You notice a certain belief playing a key role in your reasoning, you're leaning on it a lot. You think, yeah, how am I sure that's true? And you just go back one onion layer at a time, so to speak. Why do I think that? Why do other people think differently? And through the course of your days and years, you do it one belief at a time, but you're on the premise of, all the while you're doing this, I want to accept things that are true because they're true, not things I was taught because I was taught them. And maybe you can't at a glance, and maybe even by the end of your life, you won't correct every mistake you've made. But if you're on the premise of what gives you, what I owe my allegiance to is reality and goodness, not tradition, then on all these points, you'll be improving over time. So that's how I think about it. I think it is something one could do. And some practices you might notice are good for different people based on their complexion, like the suntan lotion or whatever, or not suntan lotion, sunscreen, and then you should do that. But if you turn out that you're a light-skinned person from a culture that doesn't use sunscreen, you should learn to use sunscreen. Not just not do it because you're not an Israeli or whatever. What was the other question? It was anyway. One of you want to pick up?
I want to touch on just one aspect, and it actually relates to the previous set of questions that I'm not sure or I didn't address. I'm not sure if anyone fully addressed that. So in thinking about a culture, and I think particularly in thinking about a healthy culture, it's a set of ideas and values. And if it's a good culture, it's ideas and values that are true and that are good. It might not be the whole story of what's true and not the whole story of what is good, and there's things to learn from other cultures. But the learning has to be taken seriously, that what you're really doing is evaluating, like, are there things to learn about what's true and what's good from other cultures? And this was one of the reasons when I talked about multiculturalism, it's a combination of two things. One thing that I think is really that you should be aiming for is to learn, to investigate and learn from other cultures when there's things to really learn about what's true and what's good. And that a real education is encouraging that and helping a student do that, and to think critically about their own ideas, but also to think critically about other people's ideas and what can I learn from other people. And in that sense, I think this was the Enlightenment ideal. And they thought of it, and rightly thought of it, as a universalist project. That what we're doing now in rethinking all these issues is we're putting stuff on a firm foundation where we can explain why this is true and why this is good. And it has nothing to do then with geography, with race, with where a person happens to be born, so nationality. And so these are ideas, because they're true, that anybody can learn, whether you're Japanese or Chinese or American, and they're good, and they're values. So things like individual rights, they apply to everyone. It's not they apply to people in the UK and America. They apply to everyone, and the project, and there was this confidence then. What we're doing is discovering knowledge. So, and we want to spread this, and we want to spread this across the world. And the more that the anti-enlightenment pushes that, no, what you haven't really discovered is knowledge. It's just your way of looking at the world and so on. You lose confidence, and you lose, well, why would we spread this to other people? Why would we even keep this if we don't even know if it's true and we don't even know if it's good? But a real culture, it is convinced that its ideas are true and its values are good. And if they're right about that, then it's universal. And I think part of what you've seen with globalization, I mean, I noticed this, I'm old enough to have noticed this, and people I talk to who are older notice this. The world looks more similar now than it did 100 years ago. And that's partly because ideas that have been discovered in the West and values, including forms of government and governmental organization have spread more across the world. So they've spread into the Far East, into places like Japan, into China, into India. India looks more Western now than it did 50 years ago. And that's a good thing if you think these ideas are true and the values are good. So there was a question about what will cultural diversity look like? It will lessen, I think, to the extent that true ideas and true values spread across the world. What one thinks about this kind of diversity, it lowers because people grasp, yeah, I want to be like the West, and if I can't move there, we're going to make our countries like that. And I do think you see that, and it's a good thing that you see that.
If I can push back on one aspect of that. Yes, unless the project that we're all working on doesn't have very deep roots. And Leo Strauss once said that the moderns, by which he meant everyone after the ancient Greeks, had done one thing very clever, but it had an inbuilt problem, which is he said that the moderns built their terrain on exceptionally wide but very shallow ground. And I've lifted this observation myself to say that what we're doing in Europe at the moment is, broadly speaking, to build our foundations on exceptionally wide ground. And we build them on wide ground because we need to incorporate the world. I don't think there's any part of the world, any country in the world, any area of the world that isn't in Europe somewhere. And we've gained an enormous amount from that, but it also produces challenges. And one of the challenges is, how do you create a structure in your society that is wide enough to encompass everybody, but not shallow? And I would submit that the metaphysics that we're trying to dig into the foundations in our society at the moment are exceptionally shallow. I'm not sure that things like niceness, tolerance, that it's all that deep, that our understanding of it is all that deep, or indeed that our commitment to it is all that deep. And that's why if we were to make this work, we would have to go back to asking some of the most fundamental questions. And when one of the gentlemen asked about Christianity, and I think inbuilt into this is this discussion of, as it were, of conservative values. This came up in a discussion I was doing recently in Dublin with Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, where Jordan said, it's very sensible to be conservative if you're not very bright. I had to remind him that that doesn't mean that conservatives aren't bright. But the point is that if it's worth holding on to things that people have done before and have seen them through. Like in the Torah, when it says the various invocations about not eating shellfish, very good idea. Very good idea in 200, 300 BC in a desert. If somebody offers you an oyster, don't eat it. It's seen a lot of people through that piece of advice. And custom, to put it another way, custom. If it's worked for your ancestors, if it's worked up till now, broadly speaking, with all of the caveats and so on, maybe it's worth hanging on to aspects of it rather than tearing the whole thing up and deciding you know how to do it from square one. And that brings me to what when you asked about Christianity, I would say there are many things, I think, that we gain from the Judeo-Christian tradition. Many things. One of them, by the way, which I always want to start a movement for, is non-believers for original sin. We keep on being disappointed by the thing that original sin pointed out to us a long time ago. The crooked timber of humanity, call it, approach it from which place you want. You can get it from Plato as well, you can get it from the black horse and the white horse. But there is so much in the society that forgets this, which thinks that it is perfectible, that it is almost angelic, if only it could keep going. And it's just a terrible misunderstanding that even with all of the wisdom in the world, all the riches in the world, we're still this conflicted, contorted being that doesn't yet understand itself and is not likely to. And the Judeo-Christian tradition had a way to address that I think speaks to people's instinct about themselves a lot better than most attempts to put something else in its place.
Funny, I think if you started that organization, you get almost all the non-believers in it. And I want to start an organization, People Against Original Sin. I think I'd hardly get any sign-ups. We're trying to do it. Here, we got a little bit of a start. I'm not sure how much of the audience.
We'll both start a Facebook group and
we'll see which of us does better. Yeah, I predict you will, though, because I think people do believe in original sin. I think it's part of the problem, but that's a big conversation. So I want to say, on the issue of the shallowness, the wideness but shallowness, if what we're trying to build a culture on is be nice, don't offend someone, be a good chap or something, yeah, that's pretty shallow and that's not going to get us anywhere. But if you think about what I noticed the last time I was traveling around, particularly in Eastern Europe and places that were pretty poor, is that there were iPhone ads everywhere and people had smartphones. And I see this as a tremendous cultural achievement, and I don't see it as shallow. Because I think if you think about a smartphone, it's not about being nice to people, although you can't be too unnice. It's actually about being unnice to people on Twitter, I gather. But anyway, if you have a smartphone, the value there is not just being friendly and being nice to people, but it's the idea that human beings can't accomplish much, that we're small, miserable, and so forth, that our lives are bound to be, our best laid plans are going to be dashed and so forth. To see that people have this kind of technology now, where they have access to all the information in the world at the touch of a moment, they can communicate to anyone and get their ideas across, when they couldn't a generation ago, 10 years ago, that I think is noticing that and valuing that is a tremendous spiritual achievement, and it's deeper than being of the culture, and it's deeper than valuing being friendly and nice and cooperating. It's a concretization of the fact that it's possible for human beings to accomplish significant things that change the world and the way people live in a fairly short amount of time. It reflects a valuing of knowledge, which I don't think is an automatic thing, and I think a lot of people haven't really cared what's true, but now we have a culture of looking things up, checking things up, citation needed, about a lot of different things that now is spread all over the world. We have the idea that people should be free to talk, and they get antsy when they don't think they're able to spread their views, now in more places than ever. That's a pretty deep view, particularly if you think about what you have to value about yourself, to value your right to speak. You have to value your mind, your ability. And now I think the key views of Western civilization, the key values of the Enlightenment, I think are very deep, not quite deep enough, but significantly deep, and never were as wide as I would have liked them to be. And you said, too, that they're not as wide. But I think they're spreading and taking root in places through the rise of technology, through globalization, through the spread of some of these products, business practices, technology, where they haven't before. Is that enough to reform and shape these cultures? I don't know, and I don't know about the time frames, but I think it's a pleasant sign of some deep and important things spreading.
Short follow-up. Culture consists not only from big ideas like capitalism via socialism. Very short.
How much time do we have?
20 minutes.
Brief follow-up. Yeah.
Very brief. Okay. But also small ideas like cooking. I cook potatoes, you bake them. Do I really have to rethink whether what is better, and is there even an answer what is better?
Well, it's worth thinking about why you like cooking them and baking them. It might be they're both fine, and you prefer one, so you're going to take it, but it's worth reflecting on it, and maybe your life can be enriched by cooking, boiling them sometimes and baking them other times. So the point isn't that when there are two different ways, one of them's always going to be better than the other and you should adopt it. It's you should think when there are different ways, are these both good? Is one good? Is one bad? And are neither of them any good? The noticing difference is an occasion to reflect on what's good and bad here. And the answer might be they're both fine, in which case you might, pick one for just you happen to be used to it, and that's fine. Or you might pick one because you happen not to be used to it and you like novelty.
The theme of my question is nationalism. And in European Union, we have many countries. And part of where the nationalism comes from is that different nations believe they have like different interests. And I actually wonder how well that translates from individual freely associating and joining groups with, you know, some cooperation on the level of countries. And where do you draw the line between a tribal behavior, like us versus them on sort of arbitrary characteristics, versus like, this is actually in our interest, especially that now people can move more freely across Europe and also across the world. And you could imagine that people will move to countries more corresponding to their values, for example.
Yeah, we're going to take two questions again.
Hi. What qualifies an individual to be a Westerner? Ayn Rand is a Russian American. Salman Rushdie is a British Indian. Moving your base to a Western nation, does that make me a Westerner? Or moving your thoughts to that of a Western nation? What is your opinion?
I'll take that second question. Yeah, I think it's the latter, not the former. So moving from some country to a Western country, whether it's Western Europe or North America, does not make one a Westerner. And you can remain in some other country in Africa or in Asia, and if you adopt the basic ideas of the basic ideas and of what I think is the best ideas of Western culture, that's what you become a Westerner in that regard. And I think the crucial ideas are the importance of the natural world, and that thinking and rational thinking is able to understand the rational world. So the whole respect for science, the discovery and respect for science, and that this is how our knowledge grows through the scientific method, the respect for that, the respect for the individual, and that the individual's rights and the individual as an individual, that is what morality is about, learning how an individual can accomplish his values, his goals, live his life, achieve happiness. And then a political system that enables that, doesn't undermine that. That is what the Western world, these are the ideas that the Western world brought. And I think anyone who takes up those ideas and champions those ideas and wants to live by those ideas and wants to see those ideas embedded in wherever he lives, that is what makes someone a Westerner. So I don't think of it at all as geographic location. Yeah.
But still, you can see in a lot of Europe, a lot of honor killings. This is third generation. I don't want to take any religion, but they are the third generations in Europe. And there is a huge amount of honor killings still happening, predominantly in Europe, also in Australia and Canada.
Well,
why?
If I may say so, that there's a very straightforward two parts to that. The first is a very, very deeply held belief in some communities. I know, the Kurdish communities, for instance, which disproportionately, sadly, represented in honor killing statistics in my country and I think others. It's going to take a very long time if we do this by reason and so on to try to get that out. But the reason why it hasn't been able to be got out is because we were so damn weak about asserting that. I mean, there's this famous story of Napier when he was I don't want to get all British colonialist on everyone, but when he was the governor of, I can't remember which province in India, and he famously outlawed, when the British outlawed suti, the burning of widows on funeral pyres. And this had been outlawed by the British, and representatives of local people came forward and said a local man had died and they wanted to burn his widow on the pyre. And Napier said, well, you're not allowed to. And they said, but it's our tradition. And Napier said, well, in our country, it's our tradition to hang a man who does that. If you wish, you can follow your tradition and then we'll follow ours. And that's one way around it. And it has been done, but whether you approve of that or not, you need a heck of a lot of cultural confidence to say that. and what has been the custom in Europe has been basically that, this is the multicultural era, that broadly speaking, even something like an honor killing is a kind of cultural community thing, so who are we to say? And it's not that it's allowed, but for instance, the police turned out in Britain to have, I think, 100 and something killings they hadn't really looked into because they knew it was a community matter. Now, if you're going to fail on honor killings or fail on female genital mutilation, it's very likely you're going to fail in transmitting Enlightenment values. So that's always been the most depressing aspect of this. If we can't even get those ones, what hope for everything that comes behind? I just, if I may make one observation before that point you made, which is this. I entirely agree. I think that anyone who wishes to live in the tradition of the West is of the West. And I think one of the lines which we will have to draw very clearly in the years ahead is that people who think that's not possible for racialist, ethnic reasons are going to be the people we are going to have a problem with. But if you agree that it is possible to do that, there's a rider, which I think I mentioned a bit about this in my book. The rider is that people in Europe in particular, because we don't have the same integration issues obviously as America does, we've got different ones, in some ways worse ones. One of the things I think people in Europe have been noticing is some form of this. How come anyone in the world can move to Europe and become European, yet when a European moves anywhere else in the world, they don't become of that? And this is a very serious conundrum, and I don't really have an answer to it. I know that if I moved to India, I would not at any point be regarded as an Indian, either by people from my country of origin or in the country I was in. If I went to China and I became the most loyal Chinese citizen, I would still be that English guy. So here is something I think that requires thinking about. On the one hand, it's a testament to ourselves, our values, and our attractiveness as a culture that we should be able to absorb, should wish to absorb, and should wish to keep learning. On the other hand, I do fear that people noticing this one-way streetness will feel, how can I say, locked into themselves in a way which is risky. And that leads me just to make one observation, if I may, about nationalism. We're so confused about this. And if I may very quickly say, there's a brilliant French philosopher called Chantal Delsol, who isn't read enough, I think, but she wrote a remarkable book in the 90s after the Cold War called Icarus Fallen in its English translation, where she says that the condition of modern European mankind after the fall of the wall is, she says, in the situation that Icarus would have been in if he'd survived the fall. That is, that we kept trying to fly to the sun. We made these wings. We kept dreaming these dreams. We dreamt the dreams of religion. We dreamt the dreams of states. We dreamt the dreams of two ideas that turned out to be the worst nightmares mankind had inflicted upon itself, communism, fascism. We tried these, and none of them worked, or at least they all brought us hurtling down to the ground. And yet, we didn't die. We're still here. So what do? If you're this bruised, this lacking in desire to try again to fly to the sun, what do you do? And the only solution that our societies have come up with so far is, let's have fun. Which, by the way, was what the communist leadership did in Russia as they realized it was going down. Let's at least have a nice time. So we're very confused about this, and we're particularly confused about nationalism, which we think every strain of it is going to be, if we even allow nationalism, we think it's us stitching the wings back together to go for one last flight, to try it again. And I don't think that is the case, actually. I think that there are responsible forms of it, which, as long as we keep our eyes open, we won't do it again. But this amount of self-distrust and self-doubt it's a very strange thing to live with.
To Mr. Murray, I just want to say, you talked about Winston Churchill, and I'm sorry to bring it up, but around 6 million people from my country died because of Winston Churchill. I know he's considered a national hero. Even in India, he's considered a national hero. But lately, it's like Mahatma Gandhi. He's a racist in Africa. He's a racist in Winston Churchill is also a racist in India. So I just want to say that there are good things and bad things.
If I may very quickly, I was spent last weekend, as it happened, with an Indian historian arguing about Winston Churchill and the Bengal famine. There's a very good refutation of some of the arguments that Shashi Tharoor and others have been making about that, which I think that a version of it has been embedded, which I think is not actually completely fair. But yes, I mean, it's true of their time, obviously. I would just return to one point I made, which I think we're in agreement on it, which is just that this finding a reasonable attitude towards the past is one of the most important things you can do, because it's also a plea to posterity to be nice to us. Because very few of us are ever going to, in our lives, do anything that great. But we would hope that if we did the greatest thing imaginable, it would be some mitigation against the terrible things we will have done as well. So I sort of think it's an important, again, it's a slightly conservative point to make, but it's important to have a reasonable and charitable view towards those who went before you, because you would wish those who follow after to have the same attitude towards us.
I want to say a word about that kind of issue and broaden the issue, because I have been a champion Western civilization, but that I don't mean by that everything that has been done by the civilization of the West has been good. And I think a real grappling with what has been good about it and what hasn't been is important to do. And if and this is part of it, losing confidence in itself and unable to examine itself critically, that if you don't do that, then your opponents are going to write your history. And if it looks like you're whitewashing your history, then it will become really bad. So you see this in the US, for instance. There's, I think, all kinds of, in the history departments now, it's made up and it's lies about the history of the US, and it probably exists like this in regard to all of European civilization. Now, it's certainly the way European civilization is taught in America is like that. Like, it is all wrong, but it's that the civilization itself, if it doesn't grapple with its real failures, its opponents and enemies are going to explain those. And I think in the US, for instance, you see this in regard to slavery, that I do not think the US ever adequately grappled, and after the fact, of abolishing slavery, of why did we have slavery, why did it take so long to abolish it, why was the aftermath of slavery a failure, what were the causes of that, why did the period of Reconstruction fail? And if you don't do that and don't have the confidence to do, yeah, we had failings and this is what explains it, someone else is going to explain it in a really detrimental way. And I think this is part of Europe, of the rise of communism and fascism. Europe still does not have a good explanation, I think, and hasn't critically examined why. It doesn't have to be guilt, but it has to be a critical examination of why it arose.
I couldn't agree more. Some of you will be familiar with...
So final comment from Douglas.
Some of you will be familiar with Daniel Patrick Moynihan's law, which was that, broadly speaking, complaints of human rights violations reliably happen in exactly inverse proportion to the numbers of human rights violations in a society. That is, you hear about them in the freer societies, and you don't in the closed societies, and therefore one can easily come away with the perception that the free societies are the ones that are the absolutely worst. And I mean, I think of this all the time with the focus on ourselves, a sort of slightly narcissistic focus on ourselves and our own failings, and failing to equate that with or compare it with anything in the world. And there's one question on all of these issues which I would urge everyone in this room to ask more often, particularly all of you who are young, and ask this all the time of your contemporaries. Compared to what? Compared to what? Like, if somebody's pulling a, Venezuela on you, like, make them be open about it. Make them be open the fact that what they want is to make your country Venezuela. If they think the best country in the world is Iran and you just love their civil rights, like, make them say that. But not this opaque hiding behind the real declaration they want to make. And you'll often discover really strange stuff, like what's been described as designer tribalism, this idea that the further back you go, the more native a people, the more wise they were because the older they were. And you get this all the time on the left with the sort of Naomi Klein types. Steven Pinker has a bit in his book, The Blank Slate, in which he has a chart of the number of people killed, males killed in warfare, comparing Europe in the 20th century with a set of Papua New Guinean and Southern American tribes. And it's worth looking at The Blank Slate just for this. In our 20th century, the number of males killed in warfare is, on a chart of 100%, is like 2%, I think, 3%. And these tribes are like 60% of males killed in violent conflict. And so when people say, there's something uniquely terrible about you in Europe, you're uniquely genocidal, maybe we're uniquely remembering. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. But it means you have to be incredibly careful with your critics, because you have to, and I'll finish on this thought, you have to weed out the difference between critics who are criticizing you because they want to improve you and critics who are criticizing you because they want you dead, because they don't like you, because they want it to be over. And there's a huge number of people who are not criticizing the West or Europe or the nation states of Europe because they want to improve us, but because they don't want us to be around. And you have to separate out those two things. And I would just, if I may finally say for me, what a thrill it is to be here with all of you. It's, I'm going to hang around a bit, but it's when everyone is pessimistic, and in some ways I win many Olympic categories in pessimism. Whenever you're pessimistic, one of the surefire ways to lose some pessimism is to see people like the people I've had the great pleasure of already speaking with here today, because it just gives you immense hope that on a lovely day in Prague, on a Sunday, that you've come from all over to engage yourself in the serious questions of mankind and the serious questions of our time, and it's just wonderful. So thank you.
Could I just make a last comment, or are we out of?
We have to wrap up, Greg. Thank you to the panel. Thank you to all of our attendees. I want to introduce to you the final speaker of our conference. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around. Thank you for coming here. Let's try and make this an annual recurring event and get more people interested. Go back home, do some activism. Contact me. You'll find me on Facebook, on our website, AynrandGlobal.org, or Ayn Rand Institute. Contact us if you want to get involved with us in any way. We're here to support your activism in your local community. So Tal is going to talk a lot more about that now. Our CEO, Tal Tsfany.
So do you want me to use this, or?
So we're just going to fit Tal, because Tal likes to move around a lot. And I know you guys probably want to move around a bit now, but I promise you, you're going to be energized with what Tal has to say and what he has to show you.
Okay, can you hear me? So before Annie runs away, how about a round of applause for the lady that made all of that happen? She's amazing. She's really the powerhouse behind everything that happens in Europe, so thank you so much. Thank you. Okay. So I get the honor of doing the last bit, and before I start, I committed to some people I'm going to show 100 slides in 30 minutes, and some people's like, that's not possible. I'll show you how it's done. Okay, so before I start, let's see if that works. Wait, 1 sec. If you all do 100 this way, it will take. Yeah. That's a good one. Technical difficulties? There's no way I can do 100 without this. What? It was working a second ago. 1 second. The opposite way. Okay, so before I start, a question. And you can answer that question in 3 ways. If you disagree, okay, then you get to stay and not do anything. Just stay seated and not do anything. If you somewhat agree, you get to stay in your seat and clap politely. And if you really agree with my question and the answer is yes, you get to stand up and clap as hard as you can. So the question is, did you find this event thought-provoking and interesting? Great. I just wanted to see if someone, some people. Great. Thank you. Awesome. So I guess the majority of you want us to come back next year and do more of this. And we'll be happy to get more comments about how to do this better. We actually didn't expect over 400 people. And for sure we can do it in a much more effective way next time. And we're going to get your feedback and do better. So I want to go back to this talk of discovering and practicing your individuality. I'm not a philosopher. I'm a businessman. I'm an engineer. I'm a normal person who really discovered the power of philosophy to make your life the best it can be. And I would bet that 99% of the people sitting in this room will not be intellectual philosophers. If you do, the end of the talk is about you. And maybe some of you will be. But the rest of us need to discover the power of philosophy to ignite our life to be the best it could be. And what I've done is develop my own system, that this is why I call it my test case, that you can learn from. Some of it might work for you, some might not, but I think I've thought about it a lot, and I've accumulated all of my knowledge of what I went through of applying philosophy in my life. So it really has the power to change your life. I will tell you a story. I will tell you the meaning of life. If you read the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you get that joke. And I will actually give you some tools to organize that mess called the life. And I will even make a couple of movie recommendations. So if that's not enough for you, I don't know, what blows your mind. Okay, so here I am at the age of 40. Every technical glitch possible, huh? Will that come back up, please? Please, yeah? Yes. Here I am at the age of 40. I had a little house, a pretty big house actually, and a little car, much bigger than this one. And that was my family. I usually look like that, right? And my life was perfect. I was 40 years old. It happened 9 years ago. And everything was okay. If you ask me how I'm doing, it's like, everything's fine. Great, great. But if you ask me the question, is your life kind of the best it could be? Is it bullseye? I would have, if I was honest, I would say no. It's not the best it could be. I can imagine a world where my life is much better than where I am now. I'm talking about like VP in a huge company, very successful, making a lot of money, money in the bank, savings, great house in America. Everything's good, right? Perfect life. And then I read this book. Somebody in a, we were sitting in a car. She was a colleague of mine. She said, you have to read this book. You're talking like you need this book. I said, okay, it's so thick. It was standing next to my nightstand for 3 months. I was like, I'm not starting this thing. It's a life project. And then I started reading it. And when someone hits you on the head with like a bat and you fall down to the floor, and this is how I felt. It basically, it's like taking your head out of the place and looking at it. It's like, what am I reading here? What's going on? What is she saying? Why is she saying all those things that I don't agree with but sounds so relevant and real and meaningful to me? It goes against everything. There was a question about why people love to hate Ayn Rand. It just goes against everything you were taught up to this point. I felt like I was thrown up in space, looking at my life from a distance, like miles and miles above where I was. Really looking at all the span of my life. It's like starting thinking about, as I was reading the book and progressing, is like, what does it mean? And thinking about myself at the age of 6, okay, I remember arguing with my mother that God cannot exist because I cannot see him. I need to see God. Please show me God, I'll believe. I'll put this thing on my head. My grandmother told me, put this thing on your head. It's time for you. I was like, I'm not putting it in my head unless you show me God. Please show me God. There has to be proof. Here's the first movie recommendations. If you haven't, Whiplash. Watch Whiplash. So at the age of 17, I was this guy. My hands were actually bleeding on the drums. That's what I loved doing since the age of 6. So I was playing 6-7 hours a day. I don't see if you see the blood on the floor tom there, but that's exactly was me. And I was excited about drumming. The one thing I wanted to do in this world is to continue to become a professional drummer. But then at the age of 17, I was talking to one of my uncles. It's like, I shouldn't be a drummer. It can't make money this way. It's not, a musician, come on. It's not that successful. Maybe I'll go and be a pilot in the Israeli army. That's really prestigious, right? Girls will like you. And you make, be really a challenging one. But I knew nothing about flying. I was not excited, but I was smart enough to get into the academy. And actually almost become, luckily I didn't sign the agreement that signed me up for like 7 years. And I didn't sign it. I did the whole flight academy and didn't sign the paper that says I'm there for 5 years. At the age of 22, when I graduated, I became a substitute teacher. I loved it. I walked up every day just waiting for the kids to be in front of me so I can talk to them. I was a substitute teacher, so there was no curriculum. I could talk about whatever I wanted. I'd open a newspaper and talk about death penalties and things like that with 7th graders and 8th graders. It was wonderful. I loved it. I made that much money, but I loved it. It was great. But then like that, this is not serious. I'm not going to be a teacher. I'm going to go into IT. I'm going to be a computer scientist. I'm going to learn industrial engineering. That's the serious thing to do. So I went and learned 4 years how to become an engineer. And then because I was a really good teacher, I started teaching SAT. The management of the company of the SAT prep said, you're really good. You keep winning the national best teacher award, and you're really good in marketing and sales. Why don't you kind of promote yourself? And I did. As I was a student in college, I did. At the age of 27, I became the CEO of that company, 650 people. I loved it. It was great. It was education. I was 27. I didn't know anything about running companies, but I did so well because I loved it. I woke up every day 2 hours earlier to do more of this. But at the age of 30, I saw all my friends from college becoming VPs of tech companies and making 10 times more than I am. It's like I'm missing the ship. Life is about money. Make more money, right? So I left this company and I moved to this IT company and became an IT person, right? And it felt like a grind. I was successful Again, I promoted myself all the way to VP. At one point, I managed 5,000 people in a huge project. The nice thing about this company moved me to the US at the age of 36. I was part of this high potential program, and they said, you can move anywhere you want. I said, yeah, I want to move to the US. It always sounded like a great place to be. When I landed in the US, something clicked. I looked to the left, I looked to the right. The house there was pretty far away from my house, and the other one is far away from my house, and I have all this space for myself. I never had that in Israel. I could breathe. There was a long weekend. We didn't have long weekends in Israel. We had 2 days off, and I could do whatever I want. And suddenly I made more money and less taxes, so I can do my hobbies. I started racing cars. I did all kinds of things that I loved. Something clicked, but I didn't know why, so I started learning about the history of this place, just to find out I'm just in love with this culture. All the Israelis that received me said, you know, you'll get used to the nice, kind of have a nice day American. They're all so shallow. We're, you know, there's a peach and a coconut story. Like Israelis are coconuts. They're hard on the outside, but they're really nice on the inside. And the Americans are the opposite, right? They're soft on the outside, but you can't get them to invite you to their house for dinner, right? And they said, yeah, you'll resent that. They're all Americans. And I said, what are you talking about? I love it. They're saying, how are you, and have a nice day in the supermarket, everywhere. I want this to be all around me. I want the niceness of other people and the benevolence of other people around me. At the age of 40, the one thing I was missing is really passion about my life. And another thing I noticed is that at work, if you put me in an office, I was rational and factual and clear and focused, and I had a clear vision on what I wanted to achieve. I'm pretty good in managing projects. But when it came to my life, what I wanted to do, I really had no clarity. I was seeking that clarity. And as I was reading Atlas Shrugged, it just became clearer and clearer what I was missing. I was just thinking about my life in the wrong way. This lady, I don't know if you can see her face here, it's a little dark, but she really says one thing: check your premises. Check what is behind the idea that you're thinking. Where is it coming from? And I love that, because you only have one life, one shot. Do the math. I'm going to be gone in, I don't know, 50 years. That's it. That's all I have. Multiplied with days and hours, that's all you have. You spend an hour doing something you don't like, it's gone forever. And this thing doesn't come with this. Okay, it doesn't. Nobody tells you how to live your life. And philosophy does. Philosophy does. Morality is the science of telling human beings how to live. Not culture. Culture is a little bit of a philosophy, right? But if you really understand what philosophy is all about, and eventually morality is about how to live your life. It's a how-to. So I really made a commitment. I remember that moment. I'm going to change my life. That's it. Thank you very much. No, just joking. I'm joking. So here I am in a dark room. I'm standing in my walk-in closet, and I finished Atlas. And I'm saying, what does it all mean? What do I do? Ayn Rand would tell you how to think and what are the virtues that really should kind of drive your life: rationality and self-interest. I am the center of the universe. My life would end, the world will end when I end. There will be no values for me to pursue. And by the way, it's a very optimistic view of the world. If you have another day to live, you can still pursue values. It doesn't matter what happened to you. You still can pursue values. When you're dead, it's gone. I find it very optimistic. So I started researching. And what I'm going to tell you right now is my version of how to pursue happiness. Okay, so it's a one test case. The definition of happiness that Ayn Rand gave me is happiness is that state of consciousness that proceeds from the achievement of one's values. I really recommend reading The Virtue of Selfishness. That is happiness. That's the purpose of your life. Get to that state of consciousness, but there are prerequisites. Another movie recommendation. Do you know this movie, The Pursuit of Happiness? Watch it as well. So what does it mean? As an engineer, I put things in flow diagrams, right? You have to have values. You have to achieve them. And the result is the state of consciousness that is happiness. That's the prerequisite. So the question is like, what is value? What does that mean? What do I need to pursue and achieve in order to get happy? So the definition of value is that which one acts to gain or keep. One, me, only me, acts, not think in my head, what should I do? What should I do tomorrow? Maybe I do this. No, it's the action that comes after the thought that I achieve. I gain, I get something new, or I sustain. My life is achievement. I didn't die today. I ate. That's great. How did I attain the food? I made money. That's an achievement. So what it means basically is two things. I need to discover my values, and two, I need to act to do that. That's what I need to do. Two things. It's really, the first one is finding your purpose. And I learned this amazing concept called central purpose. What is it? So Leonard Peikoff in Objectivism, the philosophy of Ayn Rand, gives it a definition. A central purpose is the long-term, long-range goal that constitutes the primary claimant of men's time, energy, and resources. The question is, can you think about your central purpose? The one thing that's going to take all your time, that you're not asleep, all your energy, or your thought, that is worth your life. You will die if not, you don't do this thing. What is it? That's a really hard question. Another thing that Rand says, which amazed me, is productive work is the central purpose of the rational man's life. The central value that integrates and determines the hierarchy of all his other values. Meaning that thing called the central purpose is the standard by which I put the hierarchy of all my values. Reason is the source and the precondition of his productive work. Pride is the result. Which means that it's not when I'm asleep, it's not when I'm, just laying around having some fun and doing some recreation, about that part of life where I do creative work. That's where it is. So I should rethink, what do I do for a living? What do I do as the central purpose of my creative work? Another thing I loved is, and I'll recommend her in the end, Jean Moroney. She says, central purpose is how you make your life add up to something meaningful, how you reshape the world in the image of your values. Guys, this is the meaning of life. You ask, what is the meaning of life? It's shaping the world in the image of your values. And the second thing is action. So here are Tal's 4-step process to happiness. You can write it down. You observe, you identify, you define, and you productize. And here's what I mean by that. You observe your values. You don't know what I wanted to do that drill of going around here and asking young people, what's your central purpose? And I bet you, I don't want to embarrass anyone, most of you don't know. You have no idea what your central purpose is. I will talk about how you discover it. So the first thing you do is just observe, like a scientist. What do I really like? What do I love about this world? Why? What does it mean to me? And I'll give you some tactics on how to do that. Then from all that observation, like experiments, you say, okay, what's the underlying theme here? Identify the core values that you really get excited about. Then from that, you try to condense it all to a central purpose that needs to meet a lot of criteria, which you need to make a living out of it. It's productive work. It's something you love. It's possible to you. You can attain it. And then what I mean by productizing yourself, you apply the central purpose in a way that is marketable. You need to make a living out of it. And you need to figure out a way who's going to pay you money to do your central purpose. How do you observe values? This is the trick. It requires discipline. Every night before you go to sleep for 60 days, and if you see yourself not meeting that, think about it harder. Write 3 good things that happened today. In short sentences, 3 things that happened today. Just, I was talking to a friend, I really loved it. It was great. I did great in my test. The boss said something nice. I finished the project. And then ask yourself once a week, what does it mean to me? And this one you write in long sentences with a pen. Not a keyboard, a pen. Why? Because it slows your mind down and allows you to think as you write. full sentences, not bullet points. What does it mean to me and why? A lot of introspection. You'll find amazing things about yourself. I guarantee you in 60 days, you will learn so much about yourself that you never had, and you'll never, in my experience, never achieve with a psychoanalyst. You will be amazed about the recurring themes that come up when you do that over 60 days. I'll give you my example. It's like from a list I took from back in 2011 or 12. I just did an amazing presentation to a bid, an RFP, like a request for proposal for our customers, and we got shortlisted. I thought that I'm really enjoying the fact that we got shortlisted. That's an achievement. No, when I wrote down what it means to me, I said, I really love presenting. Forget about the shortlisting. We had 7,000 customers, one more, great. What I really loved about this is that I got to stand up and present. I moved the entire team to the Bay Area, from Chicago to the Bay Area. It's like I was really proud. Why am I proud about it? It's just a logistical thing, moving a team from... No, I really love managing complex projects, breaking it down to pieces. I love to overcome the challenges of so many logisticals. Like it seems overwhelming before, and then 2 weeks later, it's like I've done it. It's amazing. I get so proud doing those things. Third, I hired 2 people, Win and Stacy. They were really hard to recruit, amazing people I wanted to recruit, and I came up with a story of why they should work for us. And I really love the fact that I built a story, a narrative of why they should be working for my company, and they bought it. It was amazing. So I really love stories. What it does, it makes you a valuer. A person that can look around life and say, wow, that I value. This friendship I really value. That I don't value so much. I love nice, slick computers. I love good coffee. And if you start talking in the terms of values in your life, your ability to enjoy it just goes through the roof. That's what this exercise does. Second thing is identify the core values. You will see all of those things pointing to very few things. In my case, I can tell you exactly. It was something about presenting, being on stage, presenting, talking to people. It was about philosophy. And when I reflected a lot about it, was educating people, not just talking about selling another deal, but important ideas. And they're all pointing in the same direction. And suddenly it's like, but where am I? I'm working as a VP in a 22,000 people company managing IT projects for AT&T in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm not living the life that my consciousness is telling me I need, conscious and subconsciousness, telling me I need to live. So what you do, you define a central purpose. That's a very hard step. I don't have the time to get into all of the tactics. But in a way, you say, this is really important to me. This is a core value. Without it, life is not the same. And for me, it was philosophy, education, and writing. By the way, in the process of doing this, I created so much. I read all of Rand's nonfiction because I loved philosophy. I made a commitment to read all of it. I opened a school that later I got contacted by another company that says, hey, we're doing exactly the same. Why don't you come talk to us? I went to talk to them. They're in the Bay Area. They were doing amazing. I invested in them. I became an investor. And I wrote a book. I wrote a children's book. It's called Sophie. And the amount of feedback that I get from kids and parents that are reading this book is amazing. Just by saying, that's what I love, I started doing those things. And the fourth thing is like, okay, that's nice as a hobby. You know, you want to open a school and you read all of Rand's work and, you know, what are you going to do with it? And suddenly it hit me, like I remember the minute it hit me. Yaron Brook, remember that guy? He called me a year and a half earlier and said, hey, you know, I'm thinking of stepping down and having another CEO. Would you consider it? And I said, Yaron, you know, I'm in tech. What does it have to do with me? Thank you. I'm really honored. By the way, I didn't figure out why he chose to call me. I had no idea. He saw something in me that I didn't see. It took me a year and a half to figure that out. And that means basically, that comes later, that you will be surprised how much money you can make of just following your principles, because you're going to be the best in the world in doing it. You're going to have so much passion doing it that nobody will beat you. Nobody. You will be so competitive that life will be much more profitable even if you're insecure about money and so those kind of things. It's the best option. I wouldn't be investing in people that are passionate about what they're doing rather than people just doing whatever would make them more money. I'm not going into details. I might open it for questions. I just want to say what happens next. You don't want to do anything. Your emotions scream at you. You are anxious and you're even depressed of knowing what you want to do, but all of your emotions like, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Why? Because you get anxious. All of those feelings, right? I just want to say one thing about feelings. Again, don't have the time to go into that, but Rand blew my mind when it came to the nature of feelings. What are feelings? Feelings are the effect of something. They're not the root cause of it, they're the effect. So don't think about your feelings, just observe them, saying, okay, I'm feeling anxious. Anxiousness is the feeling that tells you there's something out there that I don't know how to cope with. That's anxiety. Fear is like something's gonna hurt me and I don't know what to do about it, okay? Happiness is every feeling you can verbalize. If you verbalize what the feeling is telling you, you can say, okay, that's what I mean. Why am I feeling this? There's a value judgment. Something is threatening me. Something's gonna hurt me. I'm gonna die. It's more of the kind of fight or flight mechanism in the back of your brain saying, what's gonna hurt me? It's like, the cat that sees a dog, right? It's the same mechanism, but we're conceptual human beings, so we can be smarter than that and see through the feeling. So what do you do with those? You talk to yourself all the time. You say, Tal, you're anxious because you're making so much money right now and you're afraid that if you go into philosophy and teaching, you will make about 25% what you're making today, which means that your kids will not be able to afford the same vacation. That's really bad. I understand that, Tal. But it's what you want to do. So do you want to live your life as a miserable IT guy for the rest of your life, or maybe make less money and be happy? And then you say, wait, am I a better parent being happy and maybe a little less money, or a parent with more money but really all the time I'm like, leave me alone, I just want to go race a car because I feel like all the week I've done nothing that I love. I won the weekend, so leave me alone. I'm going to be a much better father. So it's like, wow, that makes sense. And you wake up one day after the other less anxious. It's amazing. It goes away. It takes time. It's like a gym. You go to the gym and you work out, right? And this is when the muscle grows. That works with feelings as well. Talk to yourself all the time. Be as weird. Stand in the middle of a shower and just scream. And say, no, Tal, it doesn't make sense to be anxious because it's the right thing to do. Take the job. And another thing I did that really helped me is to write other people's expectations list. What my wife wants, what my kids want of me, or I think they want of me. By the way, that's what I thought. They didn't say anything. They didn't say, hey, Dad, we want the next iPhone. No, they just, I think, would prefer to have a happy dad. Right, my grandmother, my mother, my co-workers, my boss. I said, well, how am I going to tell it to my boss? And I'm in the middle of this huge project. He'll kill me. What you'll find out that most of the resistance is stale opinions from the past. They don't really matter. You over-catastrophize it in your brain. That's what you do. And when you do that, the emotional power of those things just drop. It's like, it doesn't matter. What my boss thinks about me now doesn't matter. I will forget his name in about a month. He will forget mine in 2 weeks. Maybe not. I hope not. But it really happens. There's another quote that I love, and another book that I recommend is by Barbara Sher. I could do anything if I only knew what it was. And she says it's not laziness that stops you from pursuing your goals. It's mainly inner conflict. And she's totally right. She's totally right. You have to solve the inner conflict, and it's solvable. So what I'm going to do, because I know there are many questions, I'm going to do a webinar. I'm going to try to stick with it. And you can join that webinar. It's going to be on April 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail. And I'm going to open up to questions. And if you're interested, and I see there's a lot of response, I will continue that. But that's what I learned. There's much more that I've learned. And I've created my own tools how to deal with things. So just go to our campus of Ayn Rand Institute and click on webinars, and it's right there. And I recommend Jean Moroni's website and Thinking Lab. She has a Thinking Lab. She helps you do these things. And she really helped me. And it's Jean Moroni and thinkingdirections.com. So go pursue your life. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Okay, now I'm going to talk to the 1% that actually should listen to the 99% as well. But if you think that being here on stage is interesting to you and talking about ideas, well, first you made it here, and it's important that you made it here. And the question is, are you a future professional intellectual? The rest of us should aspire to be intellectual professionals, which means we do what we do in our profession very intellectually. But we're not people that our daily job is the ideas themselves. The people right here, those people, you don't know some of them because they're not here. Some of them have been in Atlanta, Georgia, where we're doing this kind of event every year. They're professional intellectuals, and this is what they do. And it's the toughest job in the world. Those guys are just the physicists of what I'm talking about. And I want to read a little bit of what Rand says. If you want to get inspired, read For the New Intellectual. It's a little book. And she writes, the new intellectual will be the man who lives up to the exact meaning of his title, a man who is guided by his intellect. He will be an integrated man that is a thinker who is a man of action. He will know that men need philosophy for the purpose of living on earth. What we're hearing here is how to live life. And it's complicated. It's not easy. It's not the self-help books that tell you, do 1, 2, 3, you'll be happy, or make your money and buy a Porsche and you'll be happy. No, it's much more complicated. So if you're going to be a professional intellectual, you'll have a lot to sell. I'm seeing a huge rise of intellectualism. You see that on YouTube. Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, Dave Rubin, of course, Douglas Murray and Flemming Rose. Those guys make a good living, and they're enjoying what they're doing. Can you tell that they're enjoying what they're doing? They have a great product to sell, because I think that the world is starved for what they have to say. Starved. There's no competition, guys. If you'll be good, you'll get noticed. So this is why we created our intellectual development team. And what I recommend you do as a process is not go to our intellectual development team. What you need to do first is go read. Just go read from the best thinkers. And our philosophers will tell you, go read Rand first. She is a genius. I mean, a real genius. And reading her nonfiction will really give you answers to questions that you are popping in your head. I'm hearing a lot of those questions today. But she answers all of them, most of them. Then go to our campus. There's tons and tons of courses. The person who really integrated everything for me in Objectivism was Dr. Leonard Peikoff. He wrote and talk. You just listen to him talk. You don't have to read anything. 3 hours of certainty. Can you be certain of anything? And the relationship between certain and being happy. It's an amazing talk. It changed my life. So go just listen. It's all out there. Now a drum roll. I don't have the connection of HDMI. Can you do a drum roll? Thank you. Thank you. It's worth it. Take out your phone. Please, each and every one of you, take out your phone. Open either App Store if you have Apple, or Google Play, right? If it's Android. And go search Ayn Rand. Can you find an app? Anyone? Yes? Do you see an app, a black-white app? Download it. You are the first audience in the world to touch that app. It was just launched like several hours ago. And you're going to be our beta testers. I feel like a Steve Jobs now. So you're the first audience to ever download this app. It has all of the content we have on campus. You can download it offline. You can fly, drive, run, whatever you, and listen to Leonard Peikoff and Tara Smith and Harry Binswanger and all the best thinkers we have offline. It's amazing. I'm using it now for the last day, all the time. So, so this is the app, and it's really it's something I'm very proud of. We said we're going to do it, and we're launching it now. So tell us what you think. And the third thing, or the fourth thing you need to be doing is, if you're serious about it, there's a program called the Objectivist Academic Center. It's a 3-year program, but it's just, you know, one session a week, and then there's follow-up discussions. There are prerequisite readings. So if you're serious about it, it's a commitment, but you can do it while doing other things, in being in college and doing other things. So there are 3 years. I'm taking this as an auditor. You can see this tag. So by the way, if you don't want to be a professional philosopher, but you want to deepen your understanding, you can always register as an auditor, and then you don't have to do all the homework and the writing and so on. This will make sure that you get all the skills you need of understanding what philosophy is in general, what objectivism is, and how to acquire all the intellectual skills you need. And if that is not enough, and you went through that, and you wanted to be the best in the world, we're going to put you in an incubator and wait till you hatch. We call it the ARI Cubed. It stands for Ayn Rand Institute Intellectual Incubator. What it means is that if we identify you during those 3 years and you're really good, okay, then we'll make sure that you're mentored. We might even bring you in as a junior fellow, work for us, and we'll see where it goes. Because we want you here in 7, 10 years. I don't know how long it will take you to hatch, but that's what we want. We want more thinkers. Thinkers, a minority of thinkers, are the people who change the world. It's not the masses. I heard a story that 4 people in one car who drove back from France to Russia changed Russia forever and brought communism. 4 people in a car, 4 philosophers, right? So we need more of those kind of people to propagate the right ideas, to communicate, to be a Yaron Brook who travels the world and talks to thousands and tens of thousands of people a day. We need more people communicating the right ideas. Onkar is our chief philosophy officer. He runs that program. And Jeff, where's Jeff? Here he is. Look at him. He's the guy to talk to if you want to learn more about this. I'm going to make 4 asks before we finish. One is, please, we're going to do it next year. Bring a friend. Bring a friend. If each and every one of you brings one person, we get nearly 1,000 people next time, okay? So if that was interesting, and most of you stood up and clapped, right? So bring a friend next time. Someone who's like maybe interested, not sure, and I think the experience talks for itself. Second thing, if you're interested in helping us, there's a street team. We call it the marketing street team. It allows us to, in public media, in social media, to really, distribute our content much better. And it really helps if some people just take that and share it immediately. So you get all kinds of swag and stuff like that if you help us distribute it. If you're an activist, if you want to open your own community, like 5 people in a room somewhere in some university or somewhere in your city or whatever, we're going to make it easier and easier on you to do that by supplying you more and more content. I'll give more information about it as we go along. But think about the fact that mostly what you need to do is to organize the people, put them in the room, and use our content, and then maybe have an open discussion and thoughts and Q&A with us and our intellectuals. So if you want to do that, that's my email. It's very easy to remember. Or talk to Thomas. He's there waving. You can write your email there, and just when we have more information about it, we'll just give you that. It's very interesting. I had my own book club for a while in Atlanta. It was a great way to meet smart people. The last thing is a very hard ask. This was paid by people who got excited about those ideas and now made enough money to pay your ticket, to pay your hotel, to pay you for your food and come here. And what Rand really taught me is that everything in your life is about trading value for value. Even my wife, I first told her, I had to explain myself, but I said, we're trading value. Your spiritual value for me. You're so amazing because of me. Because I value the way you are, you know, and so everything is a value for value. We created this program called the Ayn Rand membership, and you'll get a card and a really nice packet of all kinds of things, like this pin and like stickers and things like that, and all kinds of things that are unique, some of them coming from the Ayn Rand Institute archive. So you can give us $10 a month. If that's all you can afford, give us $10 a month. If you can afford more, do more. If you can't and you're starving, wait, don't starve, make some money, and then trade with us. But this is really important, guys. It's important because I think it will give you value, okay? I got so much prouder the first time I signed a check for the Ayn Rand Institute saying, wow, I got so much from that lady, and the people who, you know, make sure that her legacy survives deserve that. So it made me really proud. I was smiling. So that's it. Thank you so much for coming, and we're going to have it next year. Bet about, you know, bet on it. And if you have any comments, questions, by the way, I think we have a little bit of time. What's the time now? Yeah, I think we have a little bit of time. But before that, maybe just before that, I want to say thanks to several people. So we got a list of sponsors that you saw all you know, across the weekend. I want to thank them, and I want to thank all the volunteers that have been there all weekend. I want to name, it's Maya Taric, right? And Nehemia, and Isidora Kolar, and Jan Moshowski, and Pavla Caron, and Yuri Kinkor, and Peter Luzi, and Boaz, and all the speakers that were here, and of course, Ani. Thank you so much, everyone. And maybe I'll take about 10, 15 minutes of questions. If some of you want to ask me a question about the first part or the second part, feel free. Any questions, I'll take them for the next 10, 15 minutes. And then basically we're done. I would just say one last thing is that if you really want to ask more questions about activism, we'll be around here for the next hour or so if you want to ask more questions. Any questions about the emotional first part of my presentation about my journey, and or the other part about the Ayn Rand Institute? Any questions? You can just, no? We're good? Everything's clear? No? Question?
Maybe for next year with the bring a friend policy,
yeah,
some sort of, if you're paying the full price, get them in or something like
yeah,
that might be
yeah,
helpful.
one full price, one for free?
Yeah, because
okay.
I had two Jordan Peterson friends who would have come, but they weren't students, so I didn't know how to go.
Great advice, great advice. I'm sure everyone supports that policy. Okay, if there are any questions, so I want to thank you so much. Travel safe back home, and see you next year.